I have been like sick for over a month at this point. I apologize for my voice. I thought I was completely over a cold I've had for 2 weeks. And then I woke up this morning just like struggling in snot. And now my voice is a full octave husky lower. I felt like I was fine for the last like 3 to 4 days. It should be illegal. Hello, why are we here? Well, my name is Roska, and this is The Midnight Reader, my channel where we talk about books and other things. If you notice this outfit is very familiar in the next few videos, it's because today we are batch filming, baby, because the husband has the baby, and he's taking her on an adventure. By that, I mean an extended run, which means that I have time to film like 3 freaking videos. Hallelujah and amen. So what are we shooting today? A short time ago, I went home to Alaska, which is my home. It's where my family lives, to bring my adorable baby girl home to meet grandparents and great-grandparents, and I had a lovely time, and I shot what I would call a spectacular amount of B-roll. As you do, I had no idea what to do with my B-roll, so I put it to the people. I gave you a couple of options. Hands down, everyone agreed that the option they liked best was if I read an Alaskan-themed book and made a review about it and inserted said magnificent B-roll. So thank you if you responded to that question, because it made picking an option extremely easy. I decided to pick Into the Wild by Jon Krakauer. Now, if you don't know who Jon Krakauer is, he's an outdoor adventurer, mountaineer, and a phenomenal writer of nonfiction. Oh, ouch! So I've read a bunch of Jon Krakauer's other books. I've read Into Thin Air, which is about, I think, the most deadly mountaineering disaster that ever occurred on Everest that Krakauer just like happened to be there for. I've read Under the Banner of Heaven, which is a true crime story about murders committed by members of the FLDS, which is a fundamentalist sect offshoot branch of Mormonism. They're the ones who are always kind of in the news for endorsing polygamy. But I've never read Into the Wild, which is probably his most famous book for a very specific reason, which is that I was born and raised in Alaska, and I would say generally, like most people who were born and raised in Alaska, I grew up hating Chris McCandless, who is the topic of this book. I've lived in the lower 48 for over a decade now, so I can't really call myself an Alaskan anymore. I can just say it's where I'm from, and it's where I will always be from. Chris McCandless, in his early 20s, walked out of a life of luxury. He gave away all his worldly goods and his money and hitchhiked throughout the US, eventually jumping trains and hitchhiking his way to Fairbanks, Alaska, where he walked into the wild and then several months later was dead. He starved to death in a bus, which was left there by a mining expedition. That's generally speaking like a pretty sad story, right? So it's odd to hate a guy who's dead. And the funny thing is, I can't tell you why exactly I hated Chris McCandless. I can tell you why vaguely. He was another in the long line of people running away from society, seeking refuge in the Alaskan wild, my home, desperately underprepared and almost willfully ignorant of risks and the dangers, and seemingly shocked when Alaska swallows them whole. So Alaska is a dangerous place. It kills folks with a lifetime of mountaineering experience, homegrown Alaskans, and the people who love it most. So when another rich kid from the East Coast runs away from their family and dies up here, people just get mad. We get angry. The sentiment is, you didn't have to die here. Why the hell didn't you go somewhere else? But honestly, that's not really it either. The reason I grew up hating McCandless was that he got people killed. More specifically, his story and the subsequent spiritual pilgrims who see him as a modern-day Thoreau, who they then themselves trek blithely into the wild to the magic bus, often getting themselves trapped in the same way and requiring rescue at the risk and expense of Alaskans, or sometimes just getting themselves flat out killed in the same unprepared ways that got McCandless killed. It got so bad that they had to fly the bus off the Stampede Trail to remove it entirely as an attraction to the pilgrimage for the woefully unprepared. I figured hating someone long since dead is not a good human quality, particularly because I knew very little about him, and some of the things I thought I knew about him turned out to be just like rumor and myth. Things that were just flat out not true to make him a little bit more hateable. This book came back on my radar because Miss Reads a Lot actually read it a few months back, I think, and like really enjoyed the writing and the story. So when the opportunity came to read an Alaska themed book, I picked it up. So I read the book, and I never thought I would. And I'm not sure what it says about me that while now I pity Chris more, I still kind of fundamentally dislike him. I think he's kind of a representative of a certain type of person that is attracted to Alaska that I grew up knowing and finding just plain disrespectful. Either way, you can't really argue that Krakauer spins an exceedingly good yarn. That is, after all, the reason the Pilgrims come. But would they have come had he not died and become a martyr to the seekers of the wild? I don't think so. And maybe that's why I dislike him. I feel like he was made to be by Krakauer a patron saint of the ignorant lost, when maybe he was just another angry kid looking for solace in all the wrong places. I highlighted so much of this book. I highlighted passages every time I felt like McCandless was being a moron. There were lots of those. I highlighted passages every time I felt like McCandless was being an ass. There were also plenty of those. But mostly I kept thinking about Jon Krakauer, the author of the book, who talks a lot about how much he connected to Chris's story and how similar he felt the trajectory of their lives had been. He talks about being in the reckless mess of youth, being unable to fully cope with death, so he felt endlessly drawn to the perilous edge to look over at the yawning possibility of it. He talks about sharing an unquenchable anger towards his father, his great love of nature, and his love of the literary. What surprised me most about this book is I always knew that McCandless had endlessly been compared to like a modern day Thoreau because he gave up all his worldly possessions and just wanted to be in nature. He wanted to be in the wilderness. And I knew that he had left journals and writings behind. But what struck me was how little he actually wrote. Krakauer makes a lot of very little. Chris left behind some photos, some graffiti, annotations in books that he read, which is where you get most of the literary comparisons to him being a modern day Thoreau, and a bare minimum of a journal. Like, most of what he wrote about is like 3-word sentences, and most of it is about stuff he ate. And I kept thinking about, can you know someone from the passages they highlighted in a book? I don't know. I don't think you would know me from the books that I've annotated and lines that I've underlined. And I was left feeling like the story of Chris McCandless was more about the story of what Jon Krakauer saw in Chris McCandless. The Magic Bus, bus number 142, which was flown off the Stampede Trail, is currently residing at the University of Alaska Fairbanks, being restored. As I said, they had to remove it because so many people kept getting trapped, injured, or killed on their pilgrimage to it. The bus that was used in the movie version is currently on display outside a bar in Healy. It's filled with recreations of Chris's journey, including his photos and I believe some of his like annotations and writings. And now you too can snap a picture and post it to your Instagram, sitting on a chair outside the Magic Bus, where a poor kid curled up in a sleeping bag and starved to death. And if that doesn't make you feel just a little bit icky, I don't know what will. There's something about the sanctifying of Chris McCandless and his story which feels so fundamentally like wrong and icky to me. After reading this book, my thoughts about McCandless are definitely more complicated than they were before. I don't have a black and white hatred of him, more like a cultivated irrational dislike. Am I gonna watch the movie? No, probably not. I don't think I will. There was definitely enough saint making in the book for me. Maybe this wasn't the best pick for my soothing Alaskan b-roll, but it is what I still think of as my home after all, and I'm sort of oddly protective over it. Alaska is beautiful. It never stops being beautiful, and it never stops being harsh. And I will never stop feeling like the best way you can love Alaska is to be respectful to her harshness. Chris McCandless walked into the woods with no compass, no topographical map, 10 pounds of rice, a rifle too small, shoot large game, non-waterproof boots, and got trapped by the river rising after the spring glacial melt. Every time I thought about why McCandless died, I kept thinking about how he didn't have to. He shot a moose, by the way, like with his tiny little caliber rifle, and then the meat rotted because he didn't know how to preserve it. He didn't have to starve to death. If he'd brought a topographical map, he would have been able to tell that he could have probably forded the river upstream, or if he had walked downstream, he would have been able to find a leftover rope rigging for a river traverse. He didn't have to be stuck. And he didn't have to die there. It was also interesting to me how much Krakauer really became obsessed with how he died. He really didn't want to believe that Chris starved to death, and eventually created a theory about how he had ingested a toxicity of seeds, which had like a neurological effect on him, which made him unable to like walk and eat. The how of how McCandless died isn't super interesting to me, because if he'd packed more than a 10-pound bag of rice, if he'd known how to preserve some moose meat, if he paid attention to the people who told him him not to go in with what he was carrying. Literally, the man who dropped him at the exit of the trail said, "You don't have what you need. Just wait. I'll take you to town. I'll get you what you need. And then you can go." And he basically told him to F off. And I think that's the part that bothers me so much. Alaskans are fundamentally helpful, and they'll call you on your shit. If you're unprepared, you're unprepared. He didn't have to die. He just didn't. It's just a sad story about a dead kid, and I don't hate him anymore. I dislike his arrogance and his ignorance. But I think I fundamentally dislike Krakauer more for making a story that sanctified him. And that's it. Those are my thoughts on Into the Wild. I wound up giving this book, if you can believe it, 4 actual stars. And that's because it's incredibly well written. And if it was not well written, the pilgrims wouldn't come. So I hope you enjoyed my depressing Alaska themed book and seeing some of my B-roll from my home state. She's a beautiful place. Next week is going to be a wrap up of all the books that I read in October. There's some fun seasonal festivity ones in there. And for the month of November, I'm actually also going to be doing the Bloomin Readathon, which I did last year. I will link below. It's hosted by Allison Pages. It's a month-long readathon. There's prompts and a bingo board. I'm going to be just picking whatever books I want to read and hopelessly matching them to the bingo board in hopes that I will get a bingo. There is no TBR. I am going TBR-less into November. I hope this video finds you well. I hope you're reading something good. Please remember to like and subscribe if you can. It helps my little channel. And I will see you all next week.